Where do you draw the invisible line of what counts as real country? Let's start with a moment that shook Nashville in the mid-1970s and still fuels arguments today. Olivia Newton-John. The CMA shock that echoed for years when a singer whose sound many called two-pop carried off a major country prize in 1974, the ground shifted. For part of the industry, it felt like an honest acknowledgement that country was already moving outward to a broader audience. For purists, it was a cold shower, a fear that voters had crowned softness over roots. Familiar refrains rose across Nashville. Sold out, betrayed the tradition. Yet one fact would not budge. Country stepped into the mainstream living room and offered no apology. That win became a marker on the timeline, a before and after cited in arguments for decades. Some saw a bridge. Others saw a crack in the dam. The next figure would turn that crack into roaring stadiums and set the night sky alight. Garth Brooks. When country learned to fill stadiums. He entered in the late 1980s and wired spectacle into the genre's DNA. Arena stages, sprinting with a headset mic, climbing the rigging, bursts of pyrotechnics that turned verses into events, it all rewrote what a country show could feel like. To purists, it looked like the triumph of show over song, a swap of barroom grit for big tent theater. To others, it was democratization. Country scaled up, reached the rafters, and invited newcomers who had never set foot in a honky-tonk. The proof was everywhere. From stadium sing-alongs to hits like Friends in Low Places and the dance moving millions. Did the show swallow the storytelling, or did it amplify it tenfold? The answer depends on where you draw your line. Next comes a different rebellion, one that refuses to be polished by Nashville at all. Willie Nelson, an outlaw who played by his own rules. His timbre, his phrasing, that loose seat in the groove, none of it matched the factory settings. He took the songs back to himself, stepped away from the polish, and became the emblem of defiance with a face and a hat. For that, he drew rapture and fatigue in equal measure. Some heard living truth, others heard a stubbornness that refused the big sound. Off stage, there were rough stretches, the price of a long road that never quite smooths out. Yet time and again he pulled the conversation back to the song and to an artist's freedom to sing it his way. And if freedom arrives, not as music, but as words sharp enough to cut, the next figure knows how a single line can slam doors shut. Hank Williams Jr. The cost of saying it out loud. He inherited a mountain of a surname and chose a road without looking back. Plain talk on stage and off won him loyalists and quietly erased opportunities, as parts of the business decided not to test their luck when the reputation seas got rough. To some, he was the unvarnished voice who refused polite halftones. To others, he was the storm they didn't need. The dilemma is older than the genre itself. Is an artist obliged to speak as he feels, or to shoulder the fallout like a brand? The question stopped being theoretical in the early 2010s when a primetime football staple dropped his theme after a TV remark and doors that once swung open began to hesitate. Supporters called it backbone. Critics called it proof. Next, we step into London, 2003, where one sentence from another artist sparked bonfires and boycotts. Natalie Maines. One line, tens of thousands of empty shelves. In 2003, on a London stage, one line changed the air pressure across the industry. Radio backed away, DJs stopped announcing the songs, and supporters and critics argued in the doorways of record stores. For part of the audience, country music lives in shared symbols and the right way to read them. For others, it lives in an artist's right to say what matters. That night, a career stood at the crossroads of ideology and business, and every listener wrote a private constitution. Can you separate the song from its context? Not always. The argument stretched on, and the split left scars. And yet the genre didn't collapse. It shed its skin once more. Today, one video is enough to split an entire feed down the middle. Aldean. A small town becomes a big flashpoint. In 2023, one song and one video set off 1,000 readings. Jason Aldean's Try That in a Small Town became a Rorschach test. For some, a portrait of neighborly solidarity. For others, a coded line that divides. The lyrics, the imagery, the choice of location, all of it turned into lenses for judging the country and the genre. Accusation and defense ran on parallel tracks, and each listener seemed to hear a different record. Must country stay above politics, or is the very attempt to capture everyday life already a political act? As the audience grows, the mirrors multiply. Yet not every controversy is born of the news cycle. Some belong to older dramas. A mentor and a young artist, a painful farewell, and a song that became the goodbye. Dolly Parton. A breakup that became a myth. Her climb was talent, grind, and a hard goodbye. What began as a mentor-protege story quickly turned into a public argument about control, gratitude, and the right to choose your own course. The split hurt, the whispers were loud, and the questions about what she owed never seemed to end. She answered with a song that spoke more softly and more powerfully than any interview. In the early 1970s, she wrote her farewell, and in 1974, the world heard, "I Will Always Love You." A graceful exit framed as love rather than blame. For some, it was a masterclass in independence. For others, it was a prompt to second-guess motives. But no one denied what the voice and the pen accomplished. Sometimes hate is just the refusal to let go of expectations. Next comes the star, accused of being too smooth and too television. Kenny Rogers. Smooth edges and the too-pop accusation. In the late 1970s, big crossover hits like Lucille and The Gambler carried a cinematic sweep straight onto country radio and into living rooms far beyond it. Through the 1980s, primetime specials and story-driven singles cemented an image of an artist equally at ease on the charts and on television. Purists winced at the softness, the polish, the sense that mainstream glamour had strolled into a honky-tonk and rearranged the furniture. Yet that very smoothness opened the door for listeners outside the genre's fence line, and many who came in stayed. Why does gentleness provoke such heat? Perhaps because it breaks the old test of who counts as us. The genre did not shrink under the pressure. It grew. And there is another star whose beach-bright ease drew its own fire, as if a good-time chorus had pushed storytelling aside. Change the set. Not smoky bars now, but stadiums and sunsets on the coast. Kenny Chesney. Islands, stadiums, and the debate over emptiness. By the 2000s, his anthems were built for wide-open spaces. Wind, sun, and shoulder-to-shoulder friendship. And by the 2010s, they were the sound of summer for millions. To stricter listeners, that glow read as surface, a party where depth should be. And yet simple lines and easy melodies sometimes grip harder than long confessions. Did he trade drama for a postcard, or just find a language that big crowds can sing together without tripping on the beat? As the genre grows, it needs rooms with different light. Not everyone has to be dim, but there's a story where the dark room stops being a metaphor, where the outlaw image crashes into the penal code. Our final figure reminds us that sometimes the line is drawn not by songs, but by actions. Johnny Paycheck. When the outlaw legend cracks. His working man anthem, "Take This Job and Shove It," landed like a fist on the table and became shorthand for country's plain-spoken bite. But behind the curtain came fatigue, debt, and bad choices. In 1985, one barroom night blew into headlines, and the romance of rebellion met weight and consequence. Prison followed, nearly 2 years, then a hard pause and halting attempts to return, with a shadow that now falls across every replay. For fans, he remains the voice of people who refuse to swallow an insult. For critics, he's the caution light that real life doesn't excuse violence. Here, the genre's central tension is loudest. The line between harsh truth and its justification. Now let's pull back to the wide shot and study the whole map of arguments at once. The mirror we argue with. 10 figures, 10 reasons for irritation and awe. In one breath, the genre is scolded for being too soft. In the next, it is praised for speaking to the whole world. Some bristle at political lines, forgetting that country has always chronicled the mood of its listeners. Others demand roots and miss the simplest truth. Roots live only while they grow. From the 1974 CMA jolt to the stadium bloom of the late 1980s, from London in 2003 to a small-town flashpoint in 2023, and through a barroom reckoning in 1985, the map keeps shifting. Hate in country is less about people than about fear of losing bearings. Who owns the genre? Who may reshape it? How far you can travel from a small room and a guitar? The answer changes with every era, which is why country endures. So where do you draw your line? In a soft chorus? In stadium fire? In sharp words? Or in a hard mistake that becomes a myth? Mark your point and listen. That is where your country begins.